What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Two Car Garage. Our mission this time is to get this 1974 Yamaha DT250 behind me started and running so we can finally get to the fun part of building it into an off-road racing machine. If you didn't see last week's video, be sure you go back and see it because we did a lot of work to it. We stripped it down, we simplified the electrical system, and we're pretty much ready to set the timing absolutely perfectly to where we need to get it to run. So let's dive into the timing, get it perfect, and then get it started. Timing is set pretty darn close. All the slots are kind of like goobered out and stuff, so I think I'm between like probably 0.1 millimeters, so I think it'll be good enough to run. Let's see if we get anything. Okay, so every time I pull the plug after it tries to run, it's covered in oil, and the gap itself is covered in oil too, not just gas. So I think I might have put a little bit too much oil down in the spark plug hole when I first started cranking it, just because I didn't know how long it sits. Instead of like a couple drops, I used my like oil can and didn't really pay attention, and I used a couple of pumps, so it was probably too much. So I'm going to pull the head and clean out the cylinder, make sure that it's somewhat dry, lightly lubricate the cylinder walls, and then go from there, put it back on. I think the head gasket, right, these are partly metal. I think it should be okay, especially because somebody put this head on this bottom end, I think. So the head gasket should be okay to reuse, so I won't have to wait for another one to come in. So let's try that now. Oh yeah, that's oily. Check it out. The exhaust is back on, and I could try to start it again, but I have more work to do anyway, and while I'm a little dirty, I just want to get it done. So on our carb, before I pulled the float bowl, and it actually looked really clean. However, the pilot jet was rounded off. So like the slot in the pilot jet was rounded off. Pretty impossible to get out. So I'm gonna have to try to get that out now, and then I'm going to just clean the carb just to make sure that that's not the issue. Pretty sure it's not. I mean, I smelled gas on the spark plug, but I have to do it anyway, so I'll do it now. I just took the parts out of the ultrasonic cleaner, so let's rebuild the carb, throw it back in the bike. Well, now that the carb is back in the bike and the timing is set perfect, well, closer than it was before, let's try to start it. Fingers crossed. No dice. Well, this stinks. It doesn't start. In fact, it doesn't even get close to starting. Well, it kind of gets close to starting, right? Like when there's some fuel in the cylinder already, it'll run as long as that fuel's there. So that tells me that it's a carb problem and not a timing or spark problem. However, as you saw, like the carb is pretty darn clean. The only thing I can think of is the choke circuit. So I pulled the choke mechanism, but didn't like clean down in there necessarily. I mean, it was in the ultrasonic cleaner, but still I didn't like run a carb cleaning rod down in. So let's pull the carb again, take everything out again, and clean it all again. What is it? The definition of crazy is when you try the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. But I'm making tiny little changes each time, so maybe I'll get lucky. Let's try to fire this thing up. Let's perform some general maintenance on the bike. So we're going to drain the front fork oil, refill it, and then also clean out the seals. Remember back in the beginning, the first video when we were looking at the bike, we saw a little bit of seepage around the front fork seals, which isn't unusual on an old bike like this. However, it wasn't drastic enough to replace it, and it's just going to be off-roaded every once in a while. It's not going to be, you know, driven on the highway every single day. So I'm not going to replace the seals. Instead, I'm just going to refill the oil and clean out the seals. And if it becomes a problem later, right, if he's losing oil like crazy, I can replace him, no big deal. So let's do it. Now I'm not actually using Briggs & Stratton small engine oil. This just has nice gradients down the back side of it, and it's a nice small container. So this is empty, and I put fork oil from a larger container into this and then pour it in. So it's 175 cc's each. So now that the oil's replaced, let's clean out this seal just with this simple little seal mate tool. That way if any grime or anything is what's causing the leak, this will just clean it out. A little bit on the end there, you can see, right? But not a ton. The next maintenance item is to lubricate the clutch lever. Let's do it. And we'll lube the front brake cable as well. Now when we were doing the clutch, the sheathing was a little bit worn away in one spot, so the lube was coming out. It probably should be replaced, but I'm probably not gonna, just because it'll be probably like another $30. The cable feels smooth, right? It doesn't feel rough. So sure, a clutch cable isn't something that you want snapping, but then again, it gets to a certain point where you have to think to yourself, how much are you going to replace and how much money are you going to spend? Because I mean, really, it's a 50 or whatever year old motorcycle, 40-year-old motorcycle. You could replace everything, and sure, it'd be good, but you may not have to. So I think we're just going to leave the clutch cable where it is, even though some of the lube was shooting out of the side, and I don't think it got all the way down, but we'll see. And now we can bring our attention to the rear wheel. So we do have a front sprocket that's 1 or 2 teeth smaller than stock, and a rear sprocket that's a couple teeth bigger than stock. So that's good, right? Because remember, this is the road version, not the off-road version. So somebody before tried to make it a little bit more peppy down low by putting a bigger sprocket on the back and a smaller one on the front. So we're probably good to go as far as the sprockets go. The teeth aren't super worn down, so there's not a ton of miles on them. The chain looks good. It's not rusted apart. So all the chain needs is probably a good cleaning and lubing, and then we should be good as far as the chain and sprockets are concerned. Now that the cleaner has sat on the chain for a while, let's scrub it. Oh, it broke. Man. All right, so our front sprocket nut is loose. It should be like 25 or 30 foot-pounds. What's holding it on now, and for who knows how long, is just the bend of the retaining washer behind it. So let's knock out that bend and see if we can tighten it down. Hopefully the threads aren't compromised on either the shaft or the nut. We'll see. Now you might be wondering how I'm going to hold the back wheel still while I spin it. Well, thankfully, this is why. I use a lot of nice tools, but when it comes to screwdrivers, I use either Craftsman or Cobalt or whatever the big box stores will replace, because so many times I use screwdrivers for so many other tools. In this case, jamming it in the chain to stop the sprocket from spinning. And there's 30 foot-pounds. Now you really should use a new washer, just because you already bent this side up. But instead of doing the right thing, well, it's not the right thing. Instead of doing that, I'm just going to bend a different spot on the washer. Now that the front sprocket is tightened down and our chain is dry, let's lubricate it. All right, the chain is cleaned, waxed, the front sprocket is re-tightened down. We should be good to go. Now we are going to have to take this rear chain off when we remove the rear tire later to replace the tires, but at least it'll be clean when we do it and not super grimy. So here's an update on where we are trying to start it. Pretty much going through everything multiple times and still just cranking and not starting. So I went back, I double checked the timing, made sure that was set. It is. Now the only thing left to do, right? It has spark, it's in time, it has compression. It's got to be something in the carb. So let me show you what I found. So here we see the carb somewhat disassembled after pulling it out of the ultrasonic cleaner again. And when we look at the float bowl gasket, what we notice is that it is ripped right there. When we look over on the body of the carb, it should loop around this tube right there and seal on both sides of it. However, it's not. So, you get to a point where you look for the really little stuff. Like, I saw that before, but I didn't really think it mattered much, especially enough to keep the whole bike from starting. So here's what I'm doing. I ordered a new float bowl gasket, and this was the pilot jet. It was stuck in there, so I just left it. It was always clean, so I never really worried about it too much. But while I'm waiting for this gasket, I figured I might as well replace this pilot jet as well. That's like a common issue, right? If the bike's not starting, it's usually a clogged up pilot jet. It was clean, However, like I said, there's these drilled holes in the side of it. Could some of those have been blocked? I don't know. So I used a bolt extractor to take this out, and then dipped the whole body in the ultrasonic cleaner again, sprayed it all again, cleaned it all again, and now we're just waiting on parts. So once I get the float bowl gasket in and the pilot jet, I'll rebuild the carb and we'll put it back in and try to start it again. Well, unfortunately, we didn't get to hear this thing start yet, which really stinks, but that's how it goes, right? You do a little bit of work, wait for parts, do a little bit of work, wait for parts. Hopefully the parts that we have coming in is what we need for our carb, and then next time it just starts right up, first or second kick, and then we're good to go. Because after we get it started, then the fun part. I have a lot of parts sitting on the side of the garage, boxes and boxes, just ready to go on to build this thing into our vintage motocross racer. So that'll be the fun part. So be sure you stay tuned next week when we see if this thing turns over. As always, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.